There are some places on earth that seem to hold their breath, places where the silence is so profound it feels heavy, weighted by the stories the rocks and the dust could tell. The Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan are one such place. It's a landscape that has witnessed empires rise and fall, and on a summer's day in 2005, it became the final resting place for a group of men who embodied the very meaning of the word warrior. This is a story about a choice, a terrible, impossible choice, and the men who had to live and die by its consequences. And at the heart of it, for our story today, is one man. A man who wasn't on the ground when that fateful choice was made, but who, without a moment's hesitation, flew into the heart of the fire to save his brothers. His name was Jeffrey Scott Taylor. He was a Navy SEAL, a medic, a husband, and a son. And he was one of the rescuers, a man who knew the risk, who looked into the face of almost certain death and still chose to go. To understand why, to understand the man he was, we need to go back, not just to that tragic day, but to the life that prepared him for it. The story of Jeffrey Taylor begins not in the war-torn mountains of Afghanistan, but in the heart of America's coal country. Born on May 18, 1975, he grew up in Midway, West Virginia, a small town where life was shaped by the rhythms of the mines, where community bonds were forged in the shared hardships and quiet pride of a demanding life. The West Virginia of the 1980s and 90s was a place of economic uncertainty, with the once booming coal industry facing a precarious future. It was a place that bred a certain kind of resilience, a toughness that came not from aggression, but from endurance. From a young age, it seems Jeffrey was searching for a path that was both challenging and of service to others. He graduated from Independence High School in Coal City, and shortly after, in the summer of 1994, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He enlisted in the United States Navy. But Jeffrey wasn't destined for a life on the open seas. He was drawn to a different, more grueling calling. His first step was to become a hospital corpsman, the Navy's enlisted medical specialist. This wasn't a random choice. It was a clear indication of a desire that would become a hallmark of his character, to be the one who runs toward the danger, not to inflict harm, but to heal it. The role of a Navy corpsman is unique in the American military. They are sailors who serve with Marines, sailors who embed themselves in the grit and grime of ground combat. They carry a rifle, but their primary weapon is a medical kit. They are revered by the Marines they serve alongside, earning the affectionate and respected nickname Doc. To be a greenside corpsman, one who serves with the Fleet Marine Force, is to willingly place yourself in the thick of the fight, to be the lifeline for the wounded in the chaos of battle. For Jeffrey, this was his first crucible. From 1997 to 1999, he served as a corpsman with the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Here, he learned the hard-won lessons of battlefield medicine, the art of staying calm and focused while all around him was exploding in violence. He was honing the skills that would one day be desperately needed on a mountaintop half a world away. But for a man like Jeffrey Taylor, there was always another mountain to climb, another more demanding test to face. Serving with the Marines was an honor, but he was aiming for the pinnacle of the special operations world. In July of 1999, he took the next leap of faith and entered the brutal, soul-crushing pipeline of basic underwater demolition shock SEAL training, better known as BUD-S. BUD-S is more than just a training program. It is a 6-month-long test of a man's absolute limits. It is designed to find the microscopic percentage of individuals who possess a near superhuman combination of physical endurance, mental fortitude, and an unbreakable will. Most who attempt it fail. The cold Pacific Ocean, the endless runs in soft sand, the sleep deprivation, the constant gnawing feeling that you cannot possibly take another step. It all conspires to break you. But it didn't break Jeffrey Taylor. He endured. He and the men of his class who made it through were forged into something new. They became part of a brotherhood, a select few who had stared into the abyss of their own limitations and found the strength to push beyond. After Bud S., there was more training, jump school, SEAL qualification training. And then finally, he earned the coveted Trident, the symbol of a United States Navy SEAL. His journey took him to SEAL Team 8, then to a tour on the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt and the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center. He was becoming a seasoned operator, a man who had seen the world and understood the sharp end of American foreign policy. By February of 2003, he had found his home with SEAL Team 10, based in Little Creek, Virginia. He was a petty officer first class, a lead platoon medic, a man his teammates looked to not just for his medical skills, but for his calm and steady presence. He had become the quintessential quiet professional. By the spring of 2005, the war in Afghanistan was in its fourth year. The initial swift victory over the Taliban regime had given way to a grinding and difficult counterinsurgency. The focus of the American military, and particularly its special operations forces, was on hunting down the remnants of al-Qaeda and their Taliban allies, who were using the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the country's eastern provinces as a sanctuary. It was in this context that a new mission was conceived, a mission that would be given the deceptively simple name Operation Red Wings. The target of Operation Red Wings was a man named Ahmad Shah, a local militia leader who was growing in influence in the Kunar province, a particularly volatile region bordering Pakistan. Shah was not a major Taliban figure on the national level, but he was a significant threat in his area of operations, responsible for a series of attacks on coalition forces and Afghan government entities. The goal of the mission was to disrupt his operations, to either capture or kill him, and in doing so, to help stabilize the region ahead of the upcoming parliamentary elections. The plan, as it was conceived by the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Marines, was a multi-phase operation. The first phase, the shaping phase, would involve inserting a small 4-man SEAL reconnaissance and surveillance team onto the high ground overlooking the villages where Shah was believed to be operating. Their job was to positively identify Shah to be the eyes on the target. Once they had him, a larger force of Marines would be brought in to conduct the main assault. It was a classic special operations mission, the kind of high-risk, high-reward task that the SEALs trained for, but the environment itself was a formidable enemy. The mountains of the Kunar province are some of the most difficult and treacherous in the world. They are a vertical world of rock and scree with altitudes that steal the breath from your lungs and make every movement an exhausting effort. And crucially, it was a landscape that played havoc with communications, a fact that would soon prove to be catastrophic. On the night of June 27, 2005, the 4-man SEAL team, led by Lieutenant Michael P. Murphy, was inserted by helicopter into the mountains. The team consisted of Murphy, Petty Officer 2nd Class Danny Dietz, Petty Officer 2nd Class Matthew Axelson, and Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Luttrell, who was the team's medic. They made their way to a concealed observation post and began their watch. But early in the afternoon of June 28th, the mission was compromised. A group of local goat herds stumbled upon their position. And here, on a remote mountainside in Afghanistan, the 4 SEALs were faced with an impossible choice. The rules of engagement were clear. They could not harm unarmed civilians, but they knew that if they let the goat herds go, their position would almost certainly be revealed to the Taliban. The story, as it has been popularly told, is that the SEALs took a vote. According to Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor, he argued for killing the goat herds, but Lieutenant Murphy, the officer in charge, made the final fateful decision to let them go. They would abort the mission, move to a safer location, and wait for extraction. It was a decision that has been the subject of intense debate and controversy ever since. But what is not in dispute is what happened next. Within an hour, the SEAL team was ambushed. They were attacked by a force of Taliban fighters led by Ahmad Shah himself. The ensuing firefight was brutal and one-sided. The SEALs were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. They were fighting for their lives, falling back down the steep, treacherous slopes of the mountain, which was named Sotalosar. They fought with the courage and ferocity that is the hallmark of their kind, but the enemy had the advantage of numbers and terrain. Back at their base, the command center knew something was terribly wrong. They had received a brief, garbled transmission from the team, just enough to know they were under heavy fire. A quick reaction force was scrambled. The call had gone out, troops in contact. This is the moment where Jeffrey Taylor's story converges with the tragedy unfolding on the mountain. He and 7 other members of SEAL Team 10, along with 8 Army Night Stalkers, the elite aviation unit that flies Special Operations Forces, boarded a massive MH-47 Chinook helicopter. Their call sign was Turbine 33. Jeffrey Taylor was the lead medic on that helicopter. At 30 years old, he was a seasoned professional, a man who had been training for this kind of moment for his entire adult life. He knew exactly what he was flying into. He knew that a team of his brothers was trapped, fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. He knew the risks of flying a large, loud helicopter into a hot landing zone in broad daylight, into an active firefight in some of the most dangerous terrain on the planet. He knew the risk, and he went anyway. On board that helicopter, as it thundered towards Sotalosar, there was no hesitation. These men were rescuers. It is a sacred duty in the special operations community. You never, ever leave a man behind. They were flying into the heart of the storm to save their own. The official citation for Jeffrey's posthumous Bronze Star with Valor notes that even while airborne, he was working with his team, developing a plan of attack, preparing to hit the ground running and turn the tide of the battle. But they would never get that chance. As the Chinook Turbine 33 approached the landing zone, as it hovered preparing to insert the rescue team, a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG, fired from the mountainside, slammed into the helicopter. The explosion was catastrophic. The helicopter, with all 16 men aboard, 8 Navy SEALs, and 8 Army Night Stalkers, was blown from the sky. It crashed into the side of the mountain, killing everyone on board. In a single horrific moment, the rescue mission had become an even greater tragedy. On the ground, the firefight continued. Lieutenant Michael Murphy, despite being grievously wounded, had managed to make a final desperate call for help on a satellite phone, an act of incredible bravery that would earn him the Medal of Honor. But soon after, he, along with Danny Dietz and Matthew Axelson, were killed. The day had become the single deadliest day for naval special warfare since World War II. 19 American special operators had lost their lives. The only survivor of the initial 4-man team was Marcus Luttrell, who was blasted over a ridge by an explosion and later miraculously rescued by local Afghan villagers who risked their own lives to protect him from the Taliban. The story of Operation Red Wings, as it was presented to the American public largely through Luttrell's best-selling book Lone Survivor and the subsequent movie, became a modern-day epic of heroism and sacrifice. It was a story of a small band of warriors fighting against hundreds of Taliban, a story of the tragic but noble consequences. But history is rarely so simple. And in the years since that terrible day, a more complex and, in some ways, more troubling picture has emerged. The controversy surrounding Operation Red Wings is not about the heroism of the men who fought and died. That is beyond question. The debate centers on the planning of the mission, the intelligence it was based on, and the way the story was told to the world. Military journalist Ed Dirac, in his book Victory Point, which focuses on the role of the Marines in the operation, presents a very different account. Based on his on-the-ground reporting and access to military documents and personnel, Dirac and others have argued that the SEALs were not facing hundreds of enemy fighters, but a much smaller force, perhaps as few as 8 to 10. This is a significant discrepancy, and it changes the nature of the engagement from a last stand against an overwhelming horde to a well-executed ambush by a small, determined, and well-led enemy force. It doesn't diminish the courage of the SEALs, but it does raise difficult questions about the initial intelligence and situational awareness. There were also questions about the mission's planning and command structure. Operation Red Wings was a Marine Corps operation, but the SEALs were largely planning and executing their own part of it. This has led to criticism that there was a lack of unified command and that warnings from the Marines about the dangers of the area and the risks of a helicopter insertion may not have been fully heeded. And then there is the story of the goat herds. While Luttrell's account of a vote is a powerful and dramatic element of the story, other accounts suggest that such a thing would be highly unlikely in a SEAL team, where the officer in charge, in this case Lieutenant Murphy, would have made the final decision based on the rules of engagement, which, as has been pointed out, were clear about not harming unarmed civilians. The debate is not to cast blame, but to understand the incredible pressure and the impossible nature of the choices faced by soldiers in a counterinsurgency environment. The long-term consequences of Operation Red Wings were profound. For the naval special warfare community, it was a devastating blow, but one that led to a period of intense reflection and change. There was a renewed focus on communications equipment for mountainous terrain, on the tactics of helicopter insertions into high-threat areas, and on the importance of robust support from conventional forces. For the American public, the story of Operation Red Wings, in its simplified heroic form, became a powerful symbol of the sacrifices being made in a long and difficult war. In the tributes left by those who knew Jeffrey, a picture emerges of a man who was not just a warrior, but a good man. A friend remembered him from their early days in the Navy, in corpsman school, as a source of motivation, someone who pushed everyone around him to be better, to try harder. Another recalled his infectious smile and his genuine interest in other people, how he could strike up a conversation with anyone and make them feel like a friend. He was, by all accounts, a man of quiet strength and deep character. The story of Operation Red Wings is a tragedy. It is a story of heroism, but also of the brutal realities of war. It is a story that should be remembered not in a simplified black and white narrative, but in all of its complex and often painful detail. And in remembering it, we must remember all of the men who were lost, the 4 on the ground and the 16 in the air. We must remember the rescuers. We must remember Jeffrey Scott Taylor, the boy from West Virginia, who became a Navy SEAL, and who on a sun-scorched mountainside in Afghanistan gave everything he had in a valiant attempt to save his brothers. His life and his sacrifice will not be forgotten. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.